All right, hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and once again it is time for me to give my thoughts on a film. Writer, director, master of quirk, Mr. Wes Anderson. No doubt you guys have seen quite a few Wes Anderson movies up until this point. Classics in my mind stick out, such as Royal Tenenbaums, of course, Life Aquatic, Fantastic Mr. Fox. Over the course of Mr. Anderson's multi-decade film career, he has defined a very clear style and aesthetic, not just with the sets and the color palettes, but also the cinematography, the camera angles, the actors and actresses he tends to favor in his casts, the way that they act and deliver their lines, the soundtrack and music choices throughout his films, as well as the types of character archetypes and plot lines that he's drawn toward. I would say now more than ever, there's almost like a hyper awareness of like what makes a Wes Anderson film or scene or vibe visually. So it's with that I say Asteroid City arrives at a very interesting time in Anderson's filmography. Now, I will say off the bat, just like with my previous reviews, this video is not going to be super spoiler free, so if you're looking to avoid spoilers, you might as well turn back now. But Asteroid City, I think, is a very good film. However, it's kind of hard to recommend to newbies of Wes Anderson's work. I mean, I'm sure if you've never seen any of his films before, you could possibly enjoy it. But I think there's so many layers and so many things that you kind of like get and enjoy so much more, having seen a bunch of his previous films and having in your consciousness that awareness of like, you know, Wes Anderson's usual narrative and aesthetic cliches. Because I've seen some reviews of this film going as far as to say like, oh, you know, what he's doing here is essentially just like a parody of himself, but like, that's pretty much like the point in a way. In some ways, Asteroid City is completely unlike any Wes Anderson film up until this point, and then in other ways, it's like the most Wes Anderson movie that is ever Wes Anderson. Take, for example, one of the establishing scenes where basically all you're getting is silence and a camera kind of panning 90 degrees, 90 degrees, and 90 degrees to sort of show you the area in which everything is pretty much going to be transpiring, the set, as it were. And of course, with every turn of the camera, it settles on a new visual, a new space, and everything in that space is like perfectly, completely angled. It's sort of being shown to you straight on. He is just going so hard and so deep and so in on that and a host of other things on this film that, like, you know, he has to be aware that he's pulling from his biggest, or what you might even say are his worst cliches, and just multiplying them by 5, by 6, by 7, by 8, by 9, by 10. There are so many shots and sets on this thing that are shown in such a straight ahead, straight on way. I don't even feel like I'm watching something that exists on a 3-dimensional plane. It's just so flat. But again, that does lend itself to a very odd visual, you know, look and style that does, at this point anyway, feel very distinctly Wes Anderson. If you haven't seen a bunch of his previous movies, I don't think it would like dawn on you just how much he's like, you know, reveling in his own cliches, the expectations that this film, because it's a Wes Anderson film, it's going to look a certain way, it's going to sound a certain way, it's going to feel a certain way. And of course, in addition to, you know, the looks and the angles, the color palettes are very vibrant as well, and the characters and their dialogue and their interactions are super awkward, and everybody's like, you know, super reserved because they're bottling in all of their pain and suffering and so on and so forth. But again, as I I said earlier, there are some things about the film that are kind of new and refreshing for Wes. One, this is a bit of a sci-fi excursion involving an alien. This is also Wes's most stacked cast, I would say, in terms of like, celebrity faces and just well-knowns. I mean, of course, he does have people who he has leaned on historically very often in the past, like Jason Schwartzman. You've also got ScarJo and a bit of Margot Robbie and Steve Carell and Tom Hanks. One of the biggest criticisms I will say, though, about the film is maybe the cast was a little too big. There certainly did seem to be some characters that were not super well developed across the length of the film. However, that may have in part been because the main storyline of the movie, it isn't really, I think, the main draw of the movie or where the heart of the movie lies, the real point of the film, or what it's trying to get across in terms of like a message or a moral or, a core idea. Again, to go back to some of the reviews and criticisms I've seen of this film, a lot of the thoughts I've read online in regards to this movie are kind of focused on the main storyline of the film, which you see play out in pretty much all of the color shots of the movie. Don't get me wrong, visually, this section of the film is great and entertaining. There is a lot of cool humor and dry wit and those classic, Wes Anderson types of, interactions and bits of dialogue that we have come to know and love. But if you look at the main storyline of the film, and only the main storyline of the film, there's not really a whole lot there to eat up or dissect. There's not a lot of potent and emotionally powerful moments throughout this section of the movie to draw from. So again, if this was like your primary focus throughout the film, I can understand why you would walk away from this movie feeling kind of underwhelmed or like you didn't really get a whole lot out of it. What I personally got a lot out of was kind of the second mode of the movie. All of these black and white scenes that sort of show the characters of the movie being out of character and discussing the movie as if it were a theater production that they were all playing into. And it's here in these moments that we get just like kind of another side, I guess in a way like, not the fourth wall, but at least one of the walls is broken. Wait, no, I suppose the fourth wall is broken because we do also have Bryan Cranston in the movie who at multiple points does communicate directly to the audience. From the stage, but also a screen, because even though he is kind of like guiding things narratively and explaining to the audience what exactly is going on, he also has like kind of a bit of a Rod Sterling Twilight Zone kind of vibe about his demeanor and his speech, which, that's kind of a big frame of reference for this movie overall. I felt like a lot of the dialogue, the alien thing, the way much of it played out, the sets and the effects, like big old school classic Twilight Zone vibes. This other side of the movie where you're kind of seeing like the chaos of creating this, theater production and how people are getting emotionally wrapped up in it and the challenges of making it come together. That to me has a totally different side and personality, adds an interesting layer to the film. And actually like that is where the main moral and main kind of point of it all resides. In that respect, it also kind of reminded me of that Michael Keaton film, Birdman. Obviously executed in a much different way, but there also you kind of like see the complications of, the artist and the actor struggling with how exactly to do X or Y or Z in order to, succeed in their craft and, have this whole thing go off without a hitch. And the people having to do this are very flawed and very troubled and wrestling with a lot of things emotionally and personally. Now, unfortunately, as things often switch to black and white in order to like make a meta commentary on the story that you're seeing and storytelling and filmmaking itself, you don't really get a huge sense of what every single actor and character is going through. A lot of these moments are focused on Jason Schwartzman, the lead actor of the movie, and also the writer of the play Asteroid City, or what's being framed as a play. The actor who plays this guy is Edward Norton. It's through these moments of the film that you see Jason Schwartzman kind of like, trying out for the role. He wants to be a part of the production, and he's kind of like at a bit of a loss. He doesn't seem to fully understand his character's motivations, the way his character is and how he's bottled up and his demeanor. Continuing to play this character is like tearing him apart emotionally. He tries to go to Edward Norton for answers on this. There's an interesting scene where they kiss, which I think is like, kind of symbolic of, his interest or his connection to the creator of the play, and how he's kind of like, in a way stuck on, whatever it is he may think or say as the creator, in terms of like, this is why this happens and this is why this happens. Sorry if this is all sounding a little confusing, but it is a little confusing to witness in person as well and kind of make sense of in real time, which is why I think maybe some people weren't exactly kind of going super in on this aspect of the film from what I've read online. But I feel like Wes Anderson is trying to communicate a couple of things, in this moment of the film. One, that Jason Schwartzman is trying to like seek knowns and answers for these big questions in life that there aren't necessarily answers or explanations for. There are going to be just things in regards to human existence that you're just not going to be able to predict, that you're not going to be able to understand or foresee with 100% certainty. That's just not the way life works. And even if our anxiety around not understanding or knowing those things fully is eating at us, that's just something that we have to deal with, because being told any kind of real certainty that X or Y or Z is going to happen, or this is the answer to life, or so on and so forth, that's just going to be a farce or a lie or a bedtime story that we tell ourselves in order to just kind of get through the day and put the idea of these unknowns out of our minds. So that's one side of the coin in terms of like the overall message and moral of this film. The other side of that coin is Wes Anderson is trying to tell a story about storytelling, because I think with the way he has kind of like plotted things out with this film, he's also trying to tell people that, hey, there's no real point in you hounding me or badgering me to ask anything about my films in terms of like, why does this mean this? Why does this mean that? Why does this happen? Why does that happen? Because it's really all up to your interpretation. At the end of the day, you as the audience, whatever you take away from the film is what you take away from the film, and that is the meaning. That is the interpretation. From this piece of art, the meaning is what you make it, essentially. So there's no real sense in like, torturing yourself over interpreting perfectly or correctly all of the artist's intent when, looking at any piece of art, which, personally I thought was a really interesting angle to take and bit of commentary to make, because obviously in my line of work, I'm trying to relay to you guys what I feel like the message is in a piece of art, or kind of the takeaway is from a piece of art all the time. That's like literally all I do a lot of the time, other than, maybe discuss whether or not I thought the execution was good. Now, mind you, I don't think Wes Anderson was trying to make like, an anti-intellectual or an anti-criticism standpoint or anything like that. I mean, I think like the film Birdman, if he wanted to make that point, he could have easily like written in some critic characters like, oh, this stinks. And then, a character from the film could just be like, yeah, well, you suck and you're an idiot. Which I think is probably one of the most basic and lazy points of that film, but whatever. No, I think Wes Anderson is fine with the discussion and fine with the back and forth and fine with people having interpretations generally. It's just that clearly he doesn't vibe with the idea that there's like, one single correct inarguable interpretation of any piece of art. And, even the artist himself may not necessarily be like the person to go to explain what the meaning of the art is that they have created is or can be, because there's even a portion where Jason Schwartzman is talking to Edward Norton saying, hey, I think my character did this because of this. And, Edward Norton's response at the time was like, oh, yeah, I didn't think about it that way. You have a point there. Yeah. But as Jason Schwartzman continues through the movie, he is more and more sort of like, I guess feeling uneasy about his character and how playing this character makes him feel, and he's left with more and more questions. The lines between what is acting and what is real life, and where people are kind of investing their emotions in this real world or this fake world, gets kind of confusing, especially as we have the scene where he's talking to Margot Robbie and, makes that really awkward comment initiating their conversation, saying, "Oh yeah, aren't you the wife who was supposed to play my actress?" Those terms were purposefully switched around, not referring to her as an actress who was supposed to play his wife, which she was, but in sort of, learning more about the play as we continue through the film, we come to understand that like certain actors and actresses and films and angles or whatevers were pulled out of it over time, which I think is also kind of an attempt on Wes Anderson's part to, sort of show and explain that like it's not like any piece of art arrives to us completely fully formed and perfectly formed. There is sort of like a draft process. There is trial and error. There are things like flaws and confusion and misinterpretations and misunderstandings going on all the time behind the scenes, and all, the actors and actresses and writers of any piece of visual art can do at the end of the day is like interpret it to the best of their abilities and do everything that they can to make someone's vision come to life in person. There's going to be struggles, and there's going to be issues, and there's going to be problems with that along the way. There's going to be things that at the end of it, no matter how hard you try, maybe you're displeased by or confused with or not fully understanding in one way or another. I know I'm not going over maybe as much of the cinematography or like, some of the funny bits or whatever as well as I possibly could in this review, but I feel like if you just want a straightforward synopsis of what happens, in the regular Asteroid City movie, with all the color bits and, the big famous cast of characters and the alien landing, you could find that just about anywhere, because that's the basic, most surface level element of the movie, which I think is mostly there to sort of like distract you from the deeper stuff, or, for there to be something there as a vehicle to kind of carry the deeper commentary on storytelling, the meta stuff Wes Anderson is really trying to get across with this film. I'll say the ending left me kind of confused and disturbed, but again, given everything I've been saying up until this point about my interpretation of the film, I guess that kind of, makes sense. But you do sort of have, I think, one of the most odd and unnerving endings of any Wes Anderson movie ever, where you sort of have all the actors and actresses together, chanting this mantra of you can't wake up if you don't fall asleep, if I'm quoting it properly here. And there's, all sorts of like very aggressive close-ups and, crazy angles to the faces and, the shots of people sort of shouting this mantra. This moment also like super, super, super reminds me of like Twilight Zone episodes. Again, it's as a result of this ending that I am left with a lot of questions in retrospect. Was Jason Schwartzman the only person involved in all of this who was kind of awake? If so, what made him awake? What made everybody else asleep? What is it to be asleep in this context? And what is the difference between being awake the entire time and being asleep and then waking up from there? Which I'm sure there are some people who have seen the film who have interpretations of, and you're hammering those out in the comments right now, and that's cool, and that's fine, and that's great, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. But at the very least, what is super clear is that Wes Anderson has accomplished some interesting things, again, with this movie. He has made a film that really, truly works in layers, that kind of leapfrogs his previous films, with all of his cliches being embraced and maximized to their fullest potential. There are also some fun little Easter eggs throughout the movie here and there that are like, references to previous stuff in his films. And again, this is kind of another thing about the movie that I think like you really enjoy it most when you have at least, somewhat of a working sort of memory of like his earlier stuff. It's with that I will say I thought Asteroid City was really good. It was very entertaining, and I would recommend it to anybody, again, who has seen at least a few of Wes's films. I suppose you could go into it blind It is kind of entertaining on its own in a vacuum. Could be, I'm sure. But I feel like this movie is really for the heads. It's for the Wes heads. And I hear you, buddy. I hear you loud and clear. Let me know what you guys thought of this movie. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well over here next to my head. Another video you can check out. Hit that up with a link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Wes Anderson, Asteroid City, forever.